The specific markers used in the audio warp tab, which I demonstrated for you a little bit earlier, can also be inserted by automatically detecting them in the row hit points, which are located right over here. In fact, they're actually called hit points. Notice that their density is defined by the detection threshold and intensity. And you can see that even with the threshold set to just a few percent, some elements, like this breath here, for example, are no longer detected. That's why. You can set it to 0. There will be a lot of these regions, of course, but it will allow for precise editing. You can always repeat this process. Do it again by clicking Remove All and then enabling the Edit Hit Points option once more. The Hit Points tab can be useful if we want to insert these markers throughout the entire loop in the whole recording. So look, if I now select the Warp Markers option here, these markers will appear in the Audio Warp window in all of these places. So I can move each of these hits individually, which gives me the ability to edit the entire recording very precisely. I can also, let me undo that operation with Control Z. I can also insert these hit points for a specific section. For example, just for this first phrase that I edited in the previous segment. So now I click Warp Markers, and as you can see, in the Warp tab, they will only be inserted here. But hit points can also be used in a number of other ways. For example, if I selected the entire recording and chose the MIDI notes option, the program would ask me whether to create a track with notes that indicate the hits, or those segments, those parts of the recording, the transients that have been detected. So that's also a really interesting feature. I'm undoing that operation and going back to editing hit points. The next option is the ability to slice the recording according to those detected points. So look, if I now choose to split it like this, I can create slices. However, this function requires resetting or disabling an option first. Musical mode, meaning the loop will stop being stretched over time. So the program slices our recording, but these slices are no longer stretched in time. So if we change the tempo, they will either overlap or there will be gaps between them. So it's good to know about this. Next option, this option. On the other hand, it seems regions or events. This time, the slices are created while keeping the musical mode option. So you can see here, each of these elements is still being stretched over time. What's also cool about this is that you can, for example, swap these elements around, just like I showed you. If the snap function is enabled and you select shuffle, you can move these elements around quite easily. Of course, it probably won't be very rhythmic right now, but I think it could sound pretty interesting. Let's check it out just out of curiosity. Let's listen. Of course, that was a random edit, so it doesn't really make sense. I'm undoing that operation, but that's exactly the kind of task you can use these hit points for. So I'm going back to the menu again. Another way to use these split points, these specific hit points, are for groove templates, meaning creating a custom preset that allows us to align individual hits and individual notes on various different MIDI tracks to exactly those spots in the measure that were found in this recording. So apart from the typical values like 1/8, 1/16, we also have our own pattern created based on this recording. So this is transferring the groove. This is a really cool feature. It's useful for tightening things up, making them more consistent. If we have a conga loop and we want, for example, the bass to play in sync with those congas, this is exactly how we can achieve that. Another option available here is to use these hit points as regions. Notice that when I activate this specific function button, a significant number of these distinct regions will appear on the right side. And these regions allow me to easily identify and select specific segments of the recording, for example, to edit them offline. So that's also quite an interesting feature. And the hit points found by the program can also be used as markers in the main project. How does that work? Maybe I'll just select everything then. I click Markers, and look what just happened at the top of the screen. The program created a track with markers, and all those points where those split points occur, they are marked with markers. I can snap clips to them, MIDI events, and so on. So this is also useful especially when you're doing more advanced editing, like syncing material to video, for example. That's not all. In the Range tab, you'll find a few additional functions, such as the ability to select the entire loop or deselect what's covered by markers in the project, if that's a smaller section than the loop itself. So it's actually pretty cool how that works. We can also loop the area that contains our recording. You can use the specifically selected portion of this loop or loop it to use as a sample in the sampler. But I think that's a topic for a completely separate and dedicated episode, because it's a pretty cool feature, so it's definitely worth knowing more about. What's more, a wide variety of different functions can also be found in this row right here. Look, you can put this recording into solo mode, you can play it back, including in a loop. Here we have the option to fast forward or rewind. And you can also set the stationary cursor, which means if you're zoomed in a lot, you can set the cursor so that it's always in the center, and the recording itself will scroll. There are also precise and very detailed editing tools, so if there's a mistake in the recording, we can fix it using the stylus. Of course, we also have a magnifier available here, so we can zoom in, like this. We can also move the recording using the scrap tool. There's also the option to change the tempo or listen to a specific segment. The standard available snap and quantization functions, as well as the fundamental operating parameters of this loop, along with the option for auto zoom to event, which allows you the ability to zoom in or out on the entire event view. So that's also a very useful feature. There are quite a lot of these functions. Of course, they overlap with what we have in the row, partly in the info line and partly with what we have in the window. The definition is here.